Welcome to another episode of Growth Hacker TV. I'm Bronson Taylor, and today I have Linda Tong with us. Linda, thanks for coming on the program.
Of course, of course. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm really excited about this. You've been involved in some high profile companies, products, and I think we're going to have a fun conversation about growth. But let me run through some of the stuff you've done. You're currently at a stealth startup in mobile technology, but before that, you were the chief product officer at Tapjoy. And before that, you worked on product marketing at Google, and you focused on Google Chrome and Android, according to the internet at least. That's what it tells me. Does that all sound
Yeah.
about right?
Yep, definitely.
Perfect. So what I think we'll do is we'll kind of start back at Google and then work our way forward to the present, and maybe we'll end the interview talking about your new stealth startup, and I'll see if you can tell us anything cool about it. All right, so let's
Sure.
start with Google. What does it actually mean to work on marketing for Chrome and Android? Like at a high level, like what do you actually do? And I ask that because I actually don't know. I mean, it makes sense when you say, "Oh, the VP of growth," or "I'm the chief product marketer," at Tapjoy or whatever. But I actually don't know what marketing for Chrome and Android would mean. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, sure thing. For both teams, I was actually on the launch team. So, this is before Chrome actually came out, before people knew what it was. So, for both products, it was focused on positioning, branding, naming, translating all the marketing into 42 languages, and then actually coming up with the launch strategy and the user acquisition strategy for them. So, for Chrome, it was actually determining the name Chrome for the product, figuring out how we wanted to launch it to the world. It was actually the first product that Google launched in 42 languages across every country. Typically we would launch in the US first. So this was a really big launch for us. And a lot of it was actually figuring out how we would translate the name, translate our marketing, and make it make sense across all of these countries and all of these languages. And then from there is also doing a lot of user research. This is the first time that Google really went into the browser space, and a lot of people actually don't know what a browser is. So doing research on how we position it and how we talk about it and how we convince users to actually download it and then teach them how to use it. For Android, this was a completely different product to launch. We were launching a phone, an OS, and a marketplace all at once. So the marketing side of it was actually doing a lot of branding, working with our OEM and carrier partners to get the Android and Google brands out there, and then also market how to use the phone and how to use the OS, just because it was towards the beginning of the smartphone era. And at that point, people really were only interacting with an iPhone. So teaching them all the different gestures, the long touches, how to get to apps, how to customize our home screen, the concept of a widget. So a lot of that was really education based, working with T-Mobile on the commercials to show off these features. But that was sort of our launch strategy there, just focus on educating.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, it sounds like such an incredible experience to be there when Chrome is launching and when Android is launching, where now they're so integrated with our daily lives. I mean, they're huge parts of just society around the world. So that's awesome. How many people were on the teams? Was it one team in charge of both products? Because I've always been confused about the Chrome Android relationship. I mean, I think even recently they fired one of the heads and one group's assumed the other group. So how does that work back then? What were the marketing teams like?
Yes, it was actually two totally different teams. Chrome was run by what was considered the client group. So any sort of software that you could download at Google was part of the client team. So Google Toolbar, Google Desktop, Picasa, Uploader, Chrome, all those were under the same sort of umbrella. And that is currently right now under Sundar. It was also under Sundar at that time as well. And so our marketing team at that point was about 5 people. And then Android was actually under this completely other umbrella. It was the mobile team at Google, and under Andy Rubin at that time. And we were only about 3 people for the launch, but like completely different teams, no real overlap.
Yeah, and so how did you end up on both of them? Did you do them one at a time, or you were just the one person that
Yeah.
got to do both?
Yeah, so I joined Chrome as my first team when I joined Google. And then after we launched Chrome, about 2 days later, I transitioned over to Android to focus on that launch, which we launched about a month and a half later. And then focused from that point on all of the device launches that were coming out. We had about 8 successive devices come out in the next 6 months. So it was just a lot of time focused on launching the OS as well as how we specify by carrier and OEM across all the countries that we're launching in.
Yeah. Now maybe it's just me, but when you say the teams are between three, four, and five people for each group, that just seems like really understaffed. I mean, were you guys just like going crazy trying to launch these products or what?
We were definitely busy.
Hmm.
I definitely remember a couple nights where I slept at Google, and it's a lot of work, but when you have, limited time, limited resources, it forces you to focus on what's most important. So, we didn't. it- Everything we did was based on what is the most critical item that we can hit that has the most value for our buck. Um,
Yeah.
and so, like with Chrome, we focused a lot on our user acquisition strategy, how to get people to download Chrome and try it out,
Hmm.
and how that experience would be when we first ran the app or product really. And our acquisition strategy was using a lot of Google tools, so using AdWords, like we eat our own dog food there, so using AdWords, using cross promotional tools, promoting it on the homepage, going through AdSense and promoting on partners that are very heavy web apps where people might want a better browser. But it was, we really got our bang for our buck there, and it kept us focused.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great insight, and this is actually a tactic I use in my own life. Is I always have an ongoing to-do list, and when something new arises that I need to do, I decide where to stack rank it. Does it go at number one? Does it go at number seven? And I wake up in the morning and I do whatever's at the top, and that because that's the most important, biggest bang for the buck, and I won't allow myself to move down the list until I finish that one. And so I think it's a great way to think about it. I mean, we all are overwhelmed. We all have too much to do. So what is the most important thing? So you mentioned some of the mini acquisition strategies that you use for Chrome, and I'm really interested in this because Chrome, I mean, it grew so much after launch. I mean, browsers are very difficult to launch. I mean, Opera has just been stagnant or barely grown or even decreased. Internet Explorer has decreased, but Chrome it just like steadily grew after launch. What channel was kind of the magic channel? Was there one where it's like, yes, everyone that goes from that channel to our site does download it, does install it, and does love it?
Surprisingly enough, our largest acquisition piece was actually coming through our AdWords ads. Um, a lot of folks, so we did a lot of user research before we launched Chrome to figure out how we wanted to position the product and how we wanted to talk to consumers about it.
Hmm.
And it was actually really surprising. We assumed straight on that people would know what a browser was, and that was actually a really bad assumption. After doing research, we found that when we said, hey, what do you use to browse the internet? Users would say, oh, I use Google. And we're like, oh, really? That's funny.
Uh-huh.
And then we'd ask them things like, oh, what do you think that blue E is? And they're like, oh, the blue E means internet. And I'm like, how do you spell internet? And they'd be like, ENTERNET. And I was like, wow. Okay, so people didn't know that the E was for Internet Explorer. They just assumed it meant, some sort of internet access. And they actually never knew what a browser was. So they never really saw the difference between Firefox and Internet Explorer and Safari. They thought of it as just sort of a window to access a web page. And from there, they never realized that there were features that were associated with it. And there was safety, and there was ease of use, and there was speed. And so those were the things that we felt like we could highlight, right? We didn't want to actually go out there and scream browser and teach them, all these additional features that Chrome came with, but instead we wanted to focus on the really simple things that they could very quickly understand.
Hmm.
And so from there, when we launched it, we actually launched it as browser, like Google Chrome, the browser built by Google, to really make it clear that this was the Google browser, and have that resonate. And then we taught them basically three things. We're like, it's a faster browser, it's a safer browser, and it's easier to use.
Hmm.
And all of our AdWords are focused on ease of use, how to search really easily, how to get to Google faster than anything else, and that was actually what resonated most with people.
Yeah.
And then as they got to use Chrome and as they got better, we'd start teaching them about all the additional features like tab to search and incognito mode and things like that. But in the very beginning, we kept it really simple, and people were actually looking for a really easy way to search. So
Hmm.
the AdWords was actually our best channel.
Yeah. Do you think that it's a good strategy to focus on a couple features, a couple benefits? Because I know Chrome it does so much. I mean, you guys had rewritten like major parts of like what the browser is, and yet you couldn't really talk about it. You just had to say it's safer.
Oh,
But is that a part of a strategy you think other people should take away?
yeah, definitely. I mean, if you're going after, mass, like consumer mass audience, right? It's you have to focus on making your message incredibly short, incredibly simple, and very easy to understand. So in general, if you look at any Google download or landing page, it has maybe 3 or 4 bullets, nothing more than that. And they keep the bullets in under like 15, 20 words because they want it to be really straightforward. They want a user to be able to read it and walk away a second later and understand exactly what they read.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, right? You have to keep things simple. People will easily forget if you start hammering them with 100+ features. If I were to ask anyone right now what they saw in the WWDC iOS 7 reveal yesterday, they can maybe list 1 or 2 features. They'll just say new UI.
Yeah.
Right? But who's going to be able to list the other 50, 60 features? So I think you always have to just keep it simple and then slowly build from there.
No, that's great. It's kind of a side note. What do you think about the new UI? You mentioned the UI. You're a product person. I've heard everything from it's revolutionary to its clip art. What do you think?
I mean, in general, I love simple. I love very clean, very like flat UI. But it's also because I come as a product person that's focused on like speed and performance. And so the less flash you have on it, the less like shiny, the less textures, everything like that would ruin your performance, I think is always something that I'm willing to sacrifice. Simply because I actually just want products to work really, really well. And that's why Google was such a great fit. Everything we built, we try to keep it simple. Look at the Google homepage. There's really nothing on it.
Yeah.
But, I just wanted to be very to the point. You can get to where you want to go as fast as you can. And you don't have to wait for some weird animation to load or some sort of texture or some sort of transition. So I actually like the new UI, but I think a lot of people really like the shiny, pretty feel that was in the previous versions.
Yeah, I think I'm still on the fence. I'm not sure. I need to handle it and play with it more. But I wanted to know because you're a mobile person, but then you also help to launch Android, so I had to get your 2 cents on it. See if you take a dig at them. So let's talk about the launch of Android a little bit. You mentioned kind of education was the theme with both of them. Was education how did you have to educate people around Android at the launch? I know you mentioned like long press and things like that. What did that all look like?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the hardest things with Android was, everybody was looking at buying an iPhone. A lot of people's first smartphone was an iPhone. So when you go from an iPhone to an Android, when the behavior is different and, you're expecting there to be 1 button and there are 4, you're like, wait, what do I do? And, there's the window shade concept, which didn't exist on iPhone at that time. So they're like, why are these icons like sitting up here on the bar? And, how do I move all my icons, and what is this weird clock, and how do I get to these widgets? And a lot of these concepts are really foreign to people, and they're not obvious, and they would approach an Android device and treat it like an iPhone and expect it to act the exact same way. And when it didn't, they would get frustrated. And you don't want to just rebuild the iPhone and put it in a different shell. Like, we wanted to add value. We wanted to create new features that we thought people would like. Like searching directly from your home screen, being able to have these sort of widgets. Like, we found that once people got used to it, they loved it. But we really had to teach them how to use it because there wasn't that concept on an iPhone. And that was, all they really understood. So you had to reteach them a lot of gestures that didn't really exist. And so, yeah, it's tough. Like, you're basically trying to teach them how to use a completely different device when they're expecting an iPhone.
Yeah, it seems like it would be difficult to do that. Because it's one thing if you're the first person educating them about an iPhone or a smartphone, but when you have to come in and then kind of rewire, the hardware of their brain, it's going to make it more difficult. How did you actually educate them? Was it just through the commercials and the way they showed the device? Was it through long form kind of, blogging on Google sites? I mean, how did you actually educate people?
Yeah, we made a ton of videos on the Google side, and so we told you how to access all the different apps, how to use the different widgets. We also worked with our carrier partners. They ran a lot of commercials on major like television networks and during like basketball games and football games. So there's a lot of reach there where they'd create these commercials where you'd see different apps. And you'd actually see a person with a hand, like you'd see the finger long pressing, and you'd see like a fake vibrate. Like, they really wanted to focus on how to actually do these these steps of like setting up a widget or downloading an app and changing the location of things. And then from there, we also spent a lot of time doing seminars with our different OEM and carrier partners and their salespeople, so that when you went to a T-Mobile store to buy a new phone, all the people in that store were educated and they could walk you through a very simple demo of downloading an app, setting up a widget, getting to your home screen, and dealing with your notification bar. But we actually educated like hundreds of different sales folks across, T-Mobile's organization as well as across HTC's organization, and focused on having them also be that one point person that would talk directly with the consumer about how to, do all these different actions.
Yeah, that's great. Now let me ask you this, kind of as you look back at your time at Google there, you look back at the launch of Chrome and the launch of Android, what's the takeaway where you say, you know what, these are some lessons, or maybe one primary lesson I learned that I've rolled into everything. I took it to Tapjoy, I'm taking it into my own startup now, it's a part of who Linda is. Is there any lessons like that?
I would say never neglect user research. It's something that I think a lot of people just, in their minds are like, oh, I like this, other people like this. But in reality, you need to go out, find some people on Craigslist, whatever it is, but test out your ideas, test out your flows, test out your strategy, your positioning, and see whether it actually resonates. Because a lot of times when you're working on a product, you have so much more understanding about it. You already have these ideas captured in your mind that you think that are obvious to everybody else, and they're just not. And so, with Chrome, it was actually a huge learning. Had we gone out there and done this promotion around like the top new features for your browser, people would be like, wait, what's a browser? Right? And it's just, we ran campaigns that literally showed someone clicking on a Chrome icon on their desktop and getting to a browser, because we needed to teach them that it was a browser, right?
Yeah.
Just that concept itself was actually, really scary to a lot of users. And had we skipped that, I think we actually wouldn't have nearly as much success as we had.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing that the more you work on a product, the less you're the right person to make a decision about the product in some ways, right?
Absolutely.
Because the closer you get, you actually can't imagine what the positioning should be anymore. And so you have to rely on user research, on customer, development, those kind of things. So I think that's absolutely great advice. What would you do differently? Looking back, is there anything where you're like, I wish we had done that sooner or done this differently or changed that? Or do you feel like, it was a pretty good process overall?
In general, I think the process was pretty good for both launches. The things that will always get out of control whenever you launch a product is, really like managing the cross-functional communication. Because the nice thing at Google was product marketing worked with product management, engineering, sales, legal, finance, everyone across the board. And, one of the most important things with a successful launch is having great cross-product communication. And I can't emphasize this enough. It's just, you really, really have to become a team. You really have to work together. I wouldn't say there's really, there was a failure there, but rather I would just say that like, that's an area where you can always get better.
Yeah.
Until you all turn into one person, you can always get better.
No, that's great. And I deal with the same thing because everyone has their own priority list, and you have to find a way to make them merge together so that things actually move forward. Are there any best practices you've learned? I'm just asking for my own sake and for the sake of people watching. Is there any maybe tools you use? Is there any communication strategies? Like, what do you do to actually do it? Because I know you're dealing with the same thing in your startup now, probably.
Oh yeah. I over communicate. There's, I constantly send out emails. I use a lot of product management tools. Like currently we use Asana. But, I constantly tag people in Asana and I'm telling them exactly what's happening. I'm constantly updating, moving things around, always verifying features. And, because we're a startup, we're a really small team. And so we can always just scream across the room at each other. But I always make sure that even if we've discussed something, I document it, I write it down so that at a later date, we can always go back and check on it. But I think a big part of it is just documenting and communicating.
Yeah. Nobody's ever said on the show over communicate, but I wholeheartedly agree. I think it makes for good friendships, for good marriages, for good startups.
Definitely.
Just, until you've said it 100 times, like you haven't said it. You just have to keep saying the things that matter nonstop. And that's when communication actually starts to happen. Until someone says you're talking too much, you're not talking enough. That's my view anyway. But then again, I'm hosting a show, so of course I'm going to talk. Now, after Google, you were the chief product officer at Tapjoy. So, talk to us about Tapjoy a little bit. What is Tapjoy, and specifically, how does it help developers and advertisers and that whole kind of ecosystem there?
Yeah, sure. So Tapjoy is a mobile value exchange, which it sounds kind of bizarre, but what it is it's focused on helping developers who have, who are publishing, right? So whether it's a content app or a game or just some sort of productivity app, right? They're building this app and they need some way to monetize that app. And then you have the flip side of advertisers who are either building apps or they're offering some sort of service, who are trying to get mobile distribution. And then in the middle, you have the users who are using the apps, and they're also the target for these advertisers. And what we built was a way that we could allow all three parties to essentially win, right? Developers want to make money, consumers wanted to get deeper engagement with these apps, and advertisers wanted to reach these consumers. And so the base model that we started with was allowing developers who mostly built games, right, to earn revenue by incentivizing their users to interact with ads. In exchange, those users would receive some sort of currency or virtual good. So a typical flow might be you're playing Farmville, you want more gold coins so you can buy a blueberry patch. And in order to get those coins, you might download, the Kayak app and earn like 15 gold coins. So Kayak would basically pay for that download. That money would then go back to the developer, and in exchange, the user would get 15 gold coins.
Gotcha. No, it sounds kind of ingenious, when you think about it. Like you said, it sounds kind of like an enigma at the beginning. It's the exchange of value, but it really is. I mean, you're exchanging
Absolutely.
values across three different parties there. Now, at Tapjoy, you had a lot of exposure to apps. You see all these apps in your marketplace, working with advertisers, and you're building apps yourself, of course. What do you wish more developers knew that would help them distribute and monetize their apps more effectively? Because there's so many people that they build it and then they're just kind of stuck. They want Angry Birds, but they don't have Angry Birds. They have something you've never heard of. How do they monetize and distribute better? Teach us, help us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so I think distribution and monetization are two totally different things. And distribution, if you have enough money, in theory, you can just buy it, right? You can buy installs across the board. But sometimes you don't have money. And so you have to create this sort of discovery mechanism for yourself. And, I would say look at social media, build up your fan base, use Twitter, like find apps that are like yours and look at their keywords, right? Think about you're one of a billion apps, in an app store. And what's going to happen? Users are looking for, maybe a casual game. And how are they going to find your game if they don't know that your name is, some absurd like kitty cat fighting game or something? Yeah, I don't know what it is, but they really have to make it searchable. You have to think about SEO the same way that people have thought about SEO on the web. And it's not about sort of gaming it, but rather it's just helping people find you, really, being incredibly descriptive and, communicating with your users and like telling them about what your game is, what you do, what the functions are. Because for a lot of people, you just can't find their app. And, to them, they're like, oh, I just have to look in the charts. But it's not about the charts. It's actually about creating a really valuable description. And then from there, once you get your users, I think the biggest issue that most developers run into is they can build this great app, but they hide it behind this horrible sign-up flow. And so you open this app, and the first thing it says is like, give me your email address, your birthday, create a password, and agree to some absurd terms and conditions and privacy policy. So as a user, I'm like, I don't know what I'm getting into, and you want me to like give you all this information and agree to some weird thing where you could take my first child, like who knows? Most people are going to turn around and walk away. And I think that a lot of people should be more innovative about what their sign-up flows are. Like, do a tutorial, let them play for 2 or 3 minutes before they sign up. But don't force a user into that right away, because unless you're Facebook and a user knows exactly what they're getting into, they probably don't know what you do. They probably don't know what your app does. And so they're probably not going to sign up.
Mm-hmm. No, that's great advice.
Yeah. And I mean, from there, even if they do happen to sign up, suddenly a lot of developers are like, I just need to monetize you. And so their first thought is, I've now signed in, I've like given my life away, I've given you my email, I've created some password, and now you're going to spam me. Uh-huh. And the first thing you do is like shovel these ads at a user, and it's like, buy like $5 worth of currency and sign up here and download this app and do this. And the user's like, wait, I just signed up, I just gave you this information, I still don't know what you do, and you want me to buy something? Yeah. Right? it's just not the right flow. Wait until it's the third or fourth time that they've opened the app, or wait until they've played for 5 or 6 minutes. But, imagine if you were to go shopping and you walk into some store you've never been in, and the first thing is a sales associate walks up to you and starts pushing like $100 gift cards on you. And you're like, whoa, I don't know if I want to even buy anything here. And you're trying to sell me gift cards? Like, what's the deal? So I think it's just really thinking through, what does that flow feel like for a user who's first opening your app? Like, do they even know what you're doing? Do they know what's happening? Like, thinking about that is really going to help longer term in the monetization category.
Yeah, going back to what you said about, user research when you're launching Chrome and that kind of thing, it's almost the same sort of thing where you have to put yourself in their shoes and not think about what you want. Because if you build the app flow to be what you want, well, you want their email, you want their information, you want their credit card, you want them to give you money every month from now on until they die. Like, yeah, that's what you want, obviously. But they don't want that yet, and maybe never. So what do they want? And until you give them something they want, they don't care what you want.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly.
So just being empathetic, like getting outside of yourself. And I think that's why so many products fail, because people are not empathetic. They actually cannot see the world outside of the way they see the world, and they're just stuck pushing products on people like salesmen, So
Yeah, definitely.
that's great. Now, besides Tapjoy, because I think people should use Tapjoy if they're building apps and trying to monetize them and using the cool kind of value exchanges that Tapjoy has. But besides Tapjoy, what other tools do you recommend for app developers that are trying to do either of those two things? Maybe they're trying to monetize it, maybe they're trying to distribute it, because like you said, they're different. Anything come to mind of kind of like tips and tricks, tools to use?
Yeah, sure thing. And I mean, so I definitely say like use Tapjoy, but I mean, there are also a lot of sort of Tapjoy competitors that are either in a similar space or same space, like BlueStacks or Playhaven or, Chartboost. Like they're all kind of in the same space, and can't hurt, to sort of try everything out. But on top of that, I think really thinking about, how you attract users on a social media level, thinking about being active on Facebook, being active on Twitter, and building your fan base, and owning that relationship with your users from the get-go, creating some value there, educating them before they even come into your app, and then giving them a channel to share, and allowing them to tell their friends about your app, I think is really important. Social recommendations in general have been some of the most promising and useful and highly receptive sort of tactics for getting new users, and I think people should definitely not ignore that. And then the second piece is also just, aside from just getting more users, I think people really need to focus on re-engaging their existing user base. So really focusing on building a strong push notification system that recognizes when someone's been idle for a certain amount of time, and reaching out to them and giving them a reason to come back. I think a lot of developers overlook that, but it's really actually important and can be incredibly useful.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. It's overlooked because you're building a product, and there's some things that just have to get done. And then re-engagement is not a have to get done kind of thing. And so it's on the back burner, and then you finally get to it a few months too late. So I totally agree. Put it up on the list because it is really important. But you can launch without it, which is part of the problem. Right?
Yeah, definitely.
Now, Tapjoy became quite large. I don't know what numbers you guys have disclosed, but how big did the marketplace get to that you guys publicly talk about?
So a little while ago, they actually had a 1 billion device celebration. So there's over 1 billion unique devices on that network. And last time I checked, they had nearly 10,000 different applications on there. So it's like developers and advertisers combined. Pretty huge market.
Yeah, absolutely. How did you guys grow that market? I know you were in charge of product there, but it's not it was a small team when you first started there. I think it was like 5 employees. Is that right?
Yeah. So I was employee number 4.
Yeah, so you got to see it grow from the bottom up. How did you guys grow to have 1 billion devices?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's kind of funny how we started. We actually were a game company. We built this game called Tap Defense. It was a tower defense game, and we were actually the #1 app on the App Store for a while. And we were like, how do we make money with this? And started adding, we put AdMob in there, we put Millennial in there, try to make some money, but fill rates were terrible. It was probably 30% fill rates for banner ads at that time. So we worked in figuring out different ways to monetize that app, and we eventually stumbled upon, hey, why don't we try and get users to click on ads? Get them to engage with these ads, and in exchange, we'll give them more towers for this tower defense game. And we found our eCPMs go up about 100x when we did that. And so we're telling some of our developer friends who are also in the space, and they're like, "Whoa, wait, how did you do that?" And a lot of them got really excited about it. And so at that point, we decided to pivot and become like a monetization platform. So we built that out and we shared it with a couple of our developer friends and helped them essentially monetize their existing users. And they turned around and realized how promising the platform was and began advertising on it. So we created this micro ecosystem across about 5 or 6 of the most promising up and coming developers. And that actually seeded our product and it seeded our market. And before we knew it, we started calling other developers and telling them about it. And people would just put, a small $5,000, $10,000 test budget with us and they would immediately see results. And word spread, and the way that we built our product, anyone could essentially sign up and be running within 30 seconds. And so we were having hundreds of developers signing up every day to join us. And it just exponentially grew from there. I mean, it was amazing to watch that sort of growth. But it really just started with a small group of people where we built a product that worked, and people really loved it. And from there, word of mouth really was our biggest channel.
Yeah, what a great story. Did you guys have any problems growing both sides of the marketplace at the right pace? Because I can imagine at some points you have way too many developers or way too many advertisers, and the supply and demand just don't match up or work together. Or was it just it just worked the way you guys built the system?
No, there's definitely supply and demand issues. We focused more on the developers on the publishing side. For us, that was sort of those were our guys. Those were our people that we worked with. Those were the gamers. And, it really rang home to work with them. And, in the beginning, we seeded a lot of our advertising from other ad networks. So we pulled in different ads from like AdMob and Millennial and Quattro before it was iAd. And then, as word grew, a lot of developers started using the network themselves. So our publishers actually became our advertisers. And then before we knew it, we actually had way more advertisers than we did developers. Like publishers, and that's when we became more of a wall. It became a bidded system, and that allowed us to really sort of balance the two.
Yeah, no, so it wasn't really a problem. It was an opportunity when you had too many advertisers, because now you can just bid up the prices for the limited spaces within the games.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, that's great. That's awesome. Now, looking back at Tapjoy, I think it's been a couple years since you were there. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. What are you most proud of looking back? Is it the product Tapjoy? Is it the growth strategy? Is it something else you were a part of there? What are you just super fond of looking back?
I mean, so those early days were probably the best days of my life. When we were a team of 6, we were 4 engineers and 2 product managers. We had no sales team, no business development, no customer service, nothing. So we built a product that we were really proud of, and myself and the other PM got the opportunity to focus on everything non-engineering. So I was doing customer service, I was doing finance, I was filing our patents, I was cold calling developers and convincing them to jump on board with us and try out our service. And then I was going to their offices and helping them integrate our SDK. But it was a lot of hands-on work, and it was just wearing a lot of hats. And every day I felt like we're driving so much change and really impacting the business. And the developers that we signed up in those days were some of the largest developers out there right now. They were by far and away the largest developers Tapjoy actually had on our system up until 2 years ago, right?
Wow.
So it's it was incredibly rewarding. Like, that logistically changed the business. It set us off on a trajectory, and it was everything besides product and marketing were areas that I felt little to no confidence, and felt like I was just guessing and testing at everything. And so it was really, really rewarding to try it out and to actually drive change and accomplish these different goals.
Yeah.
I look back at that.
Yeah,
and I'm like,
that's awesome. My guess is you learned a ton in that short period of time. Would that be right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And people don't get that sometimes it's in the middle of all the chaos and just trying a million things that you just learn so many lessons that, when everything's going great, like, the lessons were learned before that.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah. And it's really important. I think it gives you confidence to sort of attack new problems and really feel like you can do anything.
Hmm.
And it takes you out of this sort of bucket of, oh, all I can do is product, so we need to hire like 15 other people to do these other functions.
Hmm.
It gives you this go-getter attitude, which I think is really important for a startup.
No, absolutely. I mean, you shouldn't hire people without that attitude. They have to be go-getters. Now, after Tapjoy, you were initially going to start your own startup, but then you ended up bumping into some previous Android people and kind of joining forces with your new startup. So walk us through between leaving Tapjoy and getting at the startup you're working on right now. What did that process kind of look like? Because I know you actually went pretty far down the roadmap of building your own thing a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so basically, when I left Tapjoy, my goal was, to work on something new. I wanted to stay in mobile, but I really wanted to build a consumer product that could impact the lives of not just, the tech savvy, but people like my mother and like my friends who don't really know much about how to use their phones. I think that we're really just scratching the surface of mobile right now. And so I wanted to build something that was highly impactful, that was, actually solving a real problem. And also just it had a lot of potential, right? Like I wanted to build something big. I'm seeing a lot of startups these days that are sort of focused on just building something small that can get acquired in a year or two, and you can have your small win and move on with life. But I'm not seeing as many people who are being like Elon Musk, who are sort of trying to build like the big, hairy, scary problems that will eventually change the world. And so I wanted to focus on that. I'm at a point in my life where I am incredibly, risk loving, and I have very little fear, very little, dependencies. So I'm like, I might as well take advantage of it.
Yeah.
Go for the biggest, scariest problem. And so I started working on a big data problem that was focused on the best recommendation system, essentially, that you could have. And there are a lot of technical issues with it, and I started looking for a team to help me solve those. And while I was doing that, I ran into one of my good friends who was on the Android team with me, and he was telling me about this very interesting mobile play that he was working on. And I was like, well, interesting. I was like, my mobile play would play really well with your mobile play. And we got coffee, we talked a little more, and he's like, you should just join us. And that planted the first seed. And then I kept, I was like, I'm doing my own company, I'm raising money, things are going well, like, we'll talk later on. And then as I kept building and as I kept solving different problems, I kept realizing all the problems that I was solving wouldn't have been problems had I just joined him. And that, together our products would actually build something incredibly beautiful and, would actually be very useful and solve a lot of real issues for people. And for me, that's where the passion's at. It's building something that's awesome. And so I was like, I don't have to be founder of my own company. I just have to work on a product that I'd work on for the next 10 years that, I'd be willing to stay up for the rest of my life. And so we got back together and we talked, and, he was like, you got to join us. Like, you're working on something that really, really resonates here. Meet the team. And if you meet the team and love them, then you're just going to have to join us. I met the team. It was a bunch of other Android folks. And it was just, it's people that I gel with. It's people I love. And our ramp-up process was perfect. And it was just the perfect fit that, for me, it didn't make sense to do anything else.
Yeah, no, that's a great story. And I think it's so cool how you viewed the whole situation, because some people, they just want to be a founder. Like, that's actually priority number one. They don't care what it is. They don't care how it works. They just want to be a founder because I think it looks good on a business card, Yeah. And then the reality is you have this long-term view, like, what can I do for 10 years? Because a startup, it takes so much longer than anybody realizes. The first few years are just spent not knowing what you're doing and figuring things out. And then there's a few years of like finally getting some traction. Like, it's hard, long work, especially when you're doing something with big data. I mean, there's so many technical problems that you're still in stealth, and you'll be in stealth for who knows how long,
Absolutely. And I mean, I think that was the thing, right? It's that, are you ready to do this for 10 years or the rest of your life or however long it takes? Because for me, I had a lot of folks reach out to me when I left and say, hey, I have this great idea. Like, I would love for you and your team to build this. And it was these ideas that I was like, I don't really know much about them, and I'm not that excited about them. Like it. And they're like, well, it's going to be a big business. You'll make a lot of money. And I'm like, if I think at the end of the day, like, I'm going to make enough money to be happy. Like, I don't need any more. But what I need to do is make sure that I'm spending, 12 to 18 hours a day at my like on my career.
Yeah.
I better love it. I better love what I'm doing. I better be incredibly passionate about it. Like
Yeah.
you can't buy that time.
Absolutely, because it's so easy to be passionate like in month one for any idea. Like you
Oh,
can make yourself passionate for a month about anything. In year five, like passion is not just something you can just create within yourself. You have to deeply love it to keep doing it after many years. So I agree 100%. Now I've heard you talk about some interesting ideas you have around ideas when you're generating ideas for your startup in terms of how people respond to them. Because most people are looking for everyone to say, "Oh, that's a great idea. You should totally do that," and they just want 100% across the board people to love it. When you're searching for ideas, you actually want some people to not like it. Explain that to us a little bit.
absolutely. I mean, I think, you need to be able to trigger a reaction. You need to push the boundaries. And if everyone's on board with it, chances are either it's not a great idea or it's an idea that someone else has tried and failed. Why wouldn't it exist if everyone loved it? I think what you really need to do is think about how can you change things up? How can you push, like different momentum out of people? Before people were like, why would I use online dating? They're like, that's stupid. Like you have to have interactions with people. And I think it's like when you have these really unique ideas that cause people to change their behavior, that's how you really change the world at the end of the day. And so for me, I really do need to find people who actually react negatively and people who react incredibly positively. And from there, I think you're onto something. You're onto something that's going to cause these reactions that people are really passionate about and that they're really, they feel that strongly about, that you're doing something that's going to be important.
Yeah. Think about, any important person in history. Think about any important movement in history, and it's polarizing. There's someone who's willing to die for it, and there's someone who hates it. I mean, the things that matter, long term in the history of the world are things that polarize people to some degree. So
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely. And
I think it's good.
I can't think of any startup that hasn't received a lot of negative reaction and positive reaction. The ones that everyone's like, I love it. Most of them don't even get funding. Most of them go nowhere. It's just, very rarely do you have that reaction.
Yeah, no, that's great because it's encouraging if some people are pushing back on your idea, but there's something there and other people love it. So it's cool when you're a founder coming up with ideas to hear input like that. Now you've been in the mobile space for a long time now. You've launched mobile platforms. I mean, you really do know this stuff deeply. And so I know your stealth startup is going to be doing whatever it does, but there's a lot of opportunities in mobile that are not being addressed. Like you probably see the holes better than most. You see where there's gaps in the experience, there's gaps in the offerings, there's gaps in the services. What do you think the biggest opportunities left in mobile are? Maybe some of the ones you're not tackling, so other people can jump on and maybe grab some of them.
Definitely. I mean, I think there's a lot, if you look at just the advertising space alone, I think there's been essentially zero innovation there. All you're really doing is taking what you see on the web and shrinking it to this tiny, tiny size. And the thing is, your phone is incredibly different from your laptop, and no one's really thought about how your experience should change on mobile advertising versus, desktop advertising. And, on top of that, right now people are really heavily focused on, advertising in games and monetizing games. And what about the guy who builds a flashlight app and, New York Times on your phone and on the web? A lot of that is old school advertising. And I think there's a lot of potential for someone to focus on monetizing non-gaming and building the new wave of what advertising should look like. So I think there's a big piece there. And then I think the second piece to go along with that is, people don't just have a phone anymore. They have a connected TV, a connected tablet. Soon they're going to have connected watches, cars, maybe a washing machine. But, you have all these devices that are going to be surrounding you. They're all connected. In theory, they could all talk to each other. Like, why not build an experience around that? But I think, you gotta skate to where the puck's going, not where it is.
Yeah, the famous Wayne Gretzky quote, I skate to where it's
Absolutely.
going. Yeah, I think about that a lot with startups. I really do, like, don't just do what you see right now. Think about what's happening in 10 minutes and tomorrow in the future, because that's where the opportunities are.
Especially with the long incubation period for startups, you better be planning for 3 years out.
Yeah, absolutely. That's for sure. Now, is there anything you can tell us about your new stealth startup? I won't pry too much, but anything you want to give us would be cool.
We're definitely thinking. I mean, obviously we're mobile. A big part of what we're thinking about is, what is the future of mobile looking like, and what does that look like for users? Like, how do you interact with multiple devices, and how how does behavior change on your phone down the line, and then how do we build the best experience to cater to that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so
So
it'll be
big, but
exciting. It'll be exciting. Do you have any ideas when you might have something public, or is it still just so stealth you don't even know what that would look like yet?
we're hoping to make a small announcement sometime later this year, probably Q3, Q4 timeframe.
Oh, cool. So we'll keep our ears open for that. Well, Linda, this has been an awesome interview. I have a couple final questions here for you, kind of high level questions, to give back to the people here a little bit. You've done a lot with marketing. You've done a lot with product. What's the single best growth hack that you've ever implemented? I know that growth hacks aren't the things that actually change a career, but it's fun to hear the little things that worked really well. Is there anything you did with Chrome or Android or Tapjoy or anything else where you did something, you weren't sure what was going to happen, and then wow, it actually brought acquisitions, it brought customers or whatever?
Well, actually, so there's one that I talked to a developer about, and he implemented it, and it was actually incredibly brilliant. For people who don't remember back in the day when Android Market first launched, they actually only had three charts. It was top paid, top free, and just in. And the charts were really, really slow moving. They weren't really changing that much. And so if you were in the top free chart, you were there for quite a while, like probably a month and a half to 2 months. And this guy was like, man, like I should be in that chart. My app is awesome, but no one is downloading it. I can't get discovered. There's 10,000 apps. Like, what am I going to do? And, I joked around. I was like, every time you update your app, it shows up in Just In. And so we joked around about it. And before I knew it, he wrote a script that had him update his app, like automatically update his app every 8 hours. And within about 3 weeks, he had actually climbed the top free chart without spending a single dollar. No advertising, no marketing whatsoever. All he did was just update his app every 8 hours.
That's awesome.
And he just got enough traffic from the just-in chart that he was able to top the top free. Yeah. About 6 months later, Google rejiggered the algorithm. But for those 6 months, he sat in the top free charts without a problem.
Yeah.
So it was pretty awesome to
I
see
love
that.
stories like that because people don't realize how much creativity and growth go hand in hand. Like you have to get creative, and that's one of those things where, there's a window of opportunity. It's 6 months in that case, but 6 months is a long time to be in the top of a chart before they fix the glitch.
I think he's ready to retire now. So
yeah, and just from a burst of creativity, he was able to pull off something like that. That's awesome. Last question here: what's the best advice that you can give to any startup that's trying to grow? It can be anything. It can be something you already said. It could be something new. But what's the best advice you have for them?
Yeah, I think a big part of it, I am a product person at heart more than anything else. And I think for anyone who's looking at growing, even if you have the best user acquisition people, even if you have a ton of money to buy installs or buy users or anything, it's when it comes down to it, the core issue is your product good? And are you solving a real problem? And is it easy for users? And so if you can't nail the very simple product problems right there, it doesn't matter how many users you buy, they're going to walk away from you, 20 minutes later. So I think first, nail down the product, nail down exactly how you're positioning it, nail down the use cases, nail down your target audience. And then from there, throw money at it. Throw money at the users and, get creative. Think about ways to find your target audience. Like maybe you love concert goers, so maybe you should have one of your people stand outside of a concert and give people a QR code to download your app. I don't know what it is, but figure out your target audience and nail down your product first.
Yeah, that's great advice. Linda, this has been such an incredible interview. Thank you so much for coming on Growth Hacker TV and just sharing all of your experience and wisdom with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.